Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Nancy Birdsall, president of the Center for Global Development, and I'm very pleased to welcome all of you on what is an important occasion in many respects. It's the 10th anniversary of our awarding the Commitment to Development Award. Hard for me to believe that this has been going on for 10 years. Lots of good things have happened. So we do this, the Center for Global Development, along with Foreign Policy, and it's called, I should remind myself, the Commitment to Development Ideas into Action Award. Moises Naim, who many of you know, the former and founding editor of Foreign Policy, was unable to be with us today. It's too bad because it was, as some of you have heard before at a luncheon between us, that we thought about having both an index and subsequently an award that would capture the idea that it's important to honor countries and people who, in the rich world, who are working to change practices and attitudes toward developing countries and poor people everywhere around the world. The members of this year's selection committee, which chose our honoree today, are myself and Moises as co-chairs, Susan Glasser, who is the editor of Foreign Policy, and the following three: Evelyn Herfkens, a founder of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals campaign and former Dutch Minister of Development Cooperation; Duncan Green, head of research for Oxfam in Great Britain, and as those of you who follow blogs will know, who writes a good blog that keeps us all up to date on development issues around the world; and Geeta Rao Gupta, who was the recipient last year of the Commitment to Development Award, is the former president of the International Center for Research on Women, and is now the deputy at UNICEF. I'd like to thank all those members of the selection committee for their service. To hear a little bit about the purpose of the award more and about our past winners, I have the pleasure of introducing Peter Skoblik, who is the executive editor at Foreign Policy. You know, I used to work at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, so I know that the executive editor is, in a sense, the one who does all the real work. I'm not sure Moises would completely agree, but he might. He is the executive editor there. He used to be at the New Republic. Prior to joining Foreign Policy just last May, he was deputy staff director of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, where he worked on approval of the New START Treaty and served as a speechwriter for Chairman John Kerry. So we have an extraordinarily bipartisan global event going on here today. Please join me in welcoming Peter.
Thank you, Nancy, for that introduction. I should mention one thing she left off my CV, which will matter only to me and possibly to Senator Lugar, but my first job was actually in the great state of Indiana, pollinating corn for Pioneer. So not a Hoosier by birth, but by early training. We're here to talk about international development and to honor Senator Lugar this afternoon. I did just want to, just on a personal note though, say that for those of us who have spent time working on nuclear security issues and on arms control issues, there are few people who garner as much respect as Senator Lugar does. It is a real honor for me to have the opportunity to present him with an award today. As Nancy mentioned, I had the opportunity to work with his staff on approval of the New START Treaty. And it was one of the great honors of my life to be able to work on that treaty and in some capacity with Senator Lugar on an accord to improve nuclear security. So I'm really genuinely and personally pleased to be here today. It is, of course, a great honor to congratulate Senator Lugar for other work that he has done in addition to nuclear weapons. As though his efforts in that field were not enough, he has done a tremendous amount when it comes to international development. He has displayed a dedication not only to improving U.S. foreign assistance programs, but ultimately to the millions of lives that those programs serve. This is a collaboration, as Nancy said, that foreign policy has been proud to be part of for the last 11 years, honoring those whose work and commitment to development has made a difference for those struggling for a better life throughout the world. The Commitment to Development Award honors an individual or organization that has made a significant contribution to changing the attitudes, policies, and practices of the rich world toward the developing world. And it's something that past recipients of this award have all had in common: a commitment to ideas that matter, a commitment to service, a commitment to influencing outcomes for the global community. From folks like Congressman Jim Colby, who was honored in 2006 for promoting innovation within the U.S. Foreign Aid Program as chairman of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Foreign Operations, to major nonprofits like the One Campaign, honored in 2008 for its incredible effort during the presidential election to mobilize more than 2 million supporters to raise awareness of global poverty as a key issue during the campaign. We've singled out individuals like Diego Hidalgo Schnur, whose tireless work in development has promoted democracy, coalitions like Publish What You Pay, a collective effort organized to promote revenue transparency in the oil, gas, and mining industries. And just last year, as Nancy mentioned, we were proud to honor Geeta Rao Gupta, former president of the International Center for Research on Women, whose strong leadership and championing for women of underserved populations transformed the role of gender in development from a critical need to a top priority for U.S. and global development initiatives. So I'm delighted now to turn the program back to Nancy, who we had the incredible foresight to dub one of our global thinkers in 2011 for her work on these issues. And she will tell you a little bit more about the selection process and about why we're here today to honor Senator Lugar. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thinkers and doers, right? So the idea of the award, as Peter said, is for us, in part, it's certainly to honor people. It's also to help us reinforce the overall message about the potential great positive impact that those of us in one part of the world can have for citizens and people in another part of the world. And in that sense, there's no question, I don't think in anyone's mind who's here, that Senator Lugar, while doing so many other good things, has been one of the key people on Capitol Hill for so long. He is a 6-term senator from Indiana. He was the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He has done so many things in so many ways to promote the idea of development, which is often not top priority in everyone's minds on Capitol Hill, certainly at all times. Let me mention a few specific areas that I think those of us who followed what Senator Lugar has been doing have noted with pride and happiness for such a long time. One is that he has taken the long view on challenges, which is difficult to do when you're in the kind of political space that he has occupied. And I think of that in the context very much of the Kerry Lugar-Berman bill, which authorized a partnership of the U.S. people with the people and government, the civilian government of Pakistan. He just reminded me that it started off as a Biden-Lugar initiative. So the important thing about if you read the legislation, the authorizing legislation, it's very impressive in terms of the concept of a partnership and a commitment over the long term. And that is something that's goes to the heart of what people working in development think about and it's a difficult task to deal with the long term in settings like Pakistan, obviously, but that legislation made an important and is making an important contribution to the concept of that partnership. I also remember that Senator Lugar was active in thinking through and supporting something that we take a lot of pride in at the center, the advanced market commitment, the concept that you could create an incentive for private research into a public good like pharmaceutical medicines. Some of you have heard more about that in the past. He co-sponsored the Cardin-Lugar transparency provision of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, known to us as Dodd-Frank. And that, of course, we honored the group, as Peter mentioned several years ago, that took a piece, that took that part of the Dodd-Frank bill and has tried to put it into action in a meaningful way. And most recently, he co-sponsored the Foreign Assistance Transparency and Accountability Act of 2012, which we hope will be taken up by the next Congress. I do hope that his example in terms of this interest and action on development issues will be remembered and replicated by his successors in the U.S. Senate and the next generation of U.S. leaders. I was pleased to hear that Senator Lugar will be continuing his work in various forms as a visiting distinguished professor of public policy at the Georgetown Public Policy Institute and as a professor in the School of Global and International Studies at Indiana University. He has also joined the German Marshall Fund, where he set up the Lugar Diplomacy Institute, which will work to change the way the U.S. Congress relates to the international community by improving communication and understanding between the Washington Diplomatic Corps and the Congress. So this is a man with many continuing ambitions. I think it is actually very lucky and fortunate that we've had this opportunity by honoring him to remind and reinforce for a larger community the message that we have and that he has supported so well. Senator Lugar. Let me also invite Ed Scott, who is the distinguished, generous, and wonderful chairman of the board of the Center for Global Development, to join me. And Ed, I believe, and Peter will be, I will get out of that picture, will be presenting the award. Sarah.
Great pleasure to present you this award. Probably need someone to help you carry out a very substantial.
Be in the picture.
It is.
Sorry, they want me in the
Substantial
picture.
accomplishment. Thank you very much. Well, needless to say, I'm deeply honored to receive this beautiful award. You've noted it's a very substantial award with a muscular chairman to handle it. And I appreciate receiving it in the company of so many good friends this afternoon. I appreciate also the ongoing accomplishments of the Center for Global Development and the contribution of Foreign Policy Group to an informed policy dialogue. And I thank especially Nancy Birdsall, Susan Glasser, who cannot be with us, but the very able executive who was and with whom we worked on the START Treaty, and the Selection Committee for this recognition and for the opportunity this afternoon to share some of my thoughts. Although I am not prepared to make a formal announcement, I am planning to devote a good share of my time in the coming years to development issues. I believe the development community is brimming with cutting-edge ideas that will make our endeavors in the area much more efficient and more effective in the future. And as a private citizen, I look forward to continuing partnerships with many of you that informed and enriched my service in the United States Senate. During the last decade, we have seen innumerable advancements in development programs and concepts that have produced tangible results. Efforts to combat HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria have produced accomplishments that clearly exceeded our expectations. We've established the Millennium Challenge Corporation, placed much more emphasis on good governance and the use of evidence to inform development efforts. The private sector has become more effective in administering assistance, and its impact in many locations rivals or exceeds the impact of government development programs on many occasions. And despite narrowly missing passage of the Foreign Assistance Reform Bill in the last Congress, and I might note it got a vote of 392 to 3 in the House of Representatives at midnight or some other time not noted, we are coming closer to a consensus on the importance of transparency, monitoring, and evaluation in foreign assistance spending. More broadly, in my experience, there is a much stronger appreciation within our government for the role development assistance plays in supporting United States national security policy. But even as we celebrate this progress, we must recognize the economic challenges that cast a shadow over the development work of our federal government and many groups devoted to this cause. The United States continues to struggle with anemic economic growth, at least to meet all of our needs, and an unacceptable unemployment rate. Our national debt today exceeds $16 trillion, as we often note day by day, is a subject of intense political contention. Efforts to contain and reverse our budget spiral are complicated by financial pressures from an aging population, lengthy military engagements, and partisan gridlock. Many other countries, including some that have been important partners in global development, face even more stringent economic scenarios. Amidst these financial conditions, it's inevitable that some will question the role of the United States in global development. A few members of Congress, in fact, argue that all foreign assistance should be eliminated. A larger number, thank goodness, would preserve assistance to Israel and some other politically popular elements, but would sharply downsize most development aid. Almost everyone expects the United States foreign assistance funding will be constrained for the foreseeable future. This might be true, and certainly planners at USAID must be engaged in efforts to squeeze the maximum value out of every dollar available. In this context, it's vital that all of us use every opportunity to explain why foreign assistance is an indispensable tool of United States foreign policy, and to support reforms of foreign assistance that ensure it is effective. In fact, when properly administered, development assistance is a bargain for our economic and diplomatic standing in the world. Even in the worst of times, the United States remains a wealthy nation with interests in every corner of the globe. Especially since the tragic events of September 11, it is evident that poorly governed states with impoverished populations can pose grave threats to our national security. Nations that struggle with severe poverty and corrupt governance are at greater risk from terrorism and instability. We have now spent hundreds of billions of dollars in recent years fighting wars and preparing for military scenarios to underdeveloped regions of the world. Even now, our government is considering how to approach the problems, for example, in Mali, a country of minimal national security interest until recently. If properly targeted, foreign assistance programs can mitigate national security risks and improve United States connections to peoples and governments. They may well save huge military expenditures down the road and help change perceptions that United States foreign policy has been excessively militarized. This is why the Defense Department has been a strong advocate of a robust foreign affairs budget. Beyond protecting our own interests, an effective foreign assistance program is essential to our moral standing as a nation. No superpower that claims to possess the moral high ground can afford to relinquish its leadership in addressing global disease, hunger, and ignorance. As I've often observed, more than any other nation, the United States possesses a traditional moral identity that is closely associated with religious tolerance, democratic governance, freedom of the individual, the promotion of economic opportunity, and resistance to oppression. No nation is more closely linked to a set of historic moral precepts than the United States of America. And no nation is judged more meticulously according to its own articulated values. As an observer of global affairs for many decades, I believe this is a good thing, and I believe our moral identity is an essential source of national power. Now, despite missteps, our country has been and still is a force for good in the world. This is indisputable from any objective point of view. And I would assert that as a moral nation founded on moral principles, we diminish ourselves and our national reputation if we turn our backs on the obvious plight of hundreds of millions of people who are living on less than $1 a day and facing severe risk from hunger and disease. This is not to say that every human being or every country in desperate circumstances is our responsibility. But the United States must be a leader in forging global partnerships and developing the most effective practices to achieve development goals. Beyond our own programs, the efforts of other nations and many non-governmental groups depend on the United States for direction, support, and even validation. We should not be hesitant, even in this budgetary environment, to make the national security and moral cases for pure development assistance. Further, we should be forthright in explaining that diplomacy and development are two distinct disciplines. Although diplomacy and development often can be mutually reinforcing, at their core, they have different priorities, different resource requirements, and time horizons. Most obviously, diplomacy is far more concerned with solving immediate problems, usually associated with countries of strategic interest. Although we hope that our development efforts will yield short-term strategic benefits, this is not their primary purpose. In a development context, we are willing to take a much longer view of the world and to devote resources to countries of less or even minimal strategic significance. We are willing to engage in missions for purely altruistic reasons. These differences underscore why development must be a goal that is independent of diplomacy, not merely a servant. To maximize our development efforts, we will need robust partnerships. And while historically non-governmental organizations and contractors have been natural partners with USAID as implementers, we must go beyond these traditional relationships. We should be expanding coordination with foundations, with corporations, small businesses, inventors, and others who contribute value. We also should be exploring trilateral assistance programs with other governments, with partnerships built from the ground up at the earliest stages of program development and sound financial structures for sustaining them. We can leverage scarce resources for maximum results. Now, as we move forward, we must embrace transparency in foreign assistance programs. We should be forthcoming about where taxpayer dollars are spent, what goals are meant to be accomplished, and whether those goals are achieved. This is vital, not only to provide taxpayers a clear picture of how their money is being used, but also to reinforce United States leadership in transparent economic development. Transparency helps level the playing field for United States companies, counters the propensity of resource-rich developing countries toward wasteful spending, and combats the corruption that the World Bank has identified as, quote, the single biggest obstacle to economic and social development, end of quote. Toward this end, it is vital to implement the 2010 Cardin-Lugar Amendment, which requires all companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange to publish their payments to foreign governments for oil, natural gas, and mineral development. Our government should also be pressing other developed nations to support this global movement toward transparency. Failure to fully embrace Cardin-Lugar would squander an opportunity to transform the developmental scenarios of resource-rich countries mired in poverty. I frequently have asserted that the United States should maintain a unique leadership in global food security. Throughout our history as a nation, we have developed fertile cropland, improved efficiencies through technology, and benefited from the Green Revolution with enormous increases in crop yield. We have developed efficient systems for distribution of agricultural products for trade and humanitarian purposes. Our agricultural researchers at our land-grant universities are the best in the world. They continually improve seed production through genetically modified organisms and address the impacts of pests and diseases. We know this sector, and we can perform extremely well in it. Further, agricultural results are subject to close measurement, and food can be the basis on which other development sectors are built. I believe all of these factors translate into an American comparative advantage in global agricultural development that we should be leveraging to maximum effect. I applaud the commitment that each of you has made to global development. Many of you have been engaged in development work for decades under very difficult circumstances. I admire your courage, your compassion, your skill, as you continue to find ways to deliver results. I look forward to our achievements in the years to come, and it's a great honor to celebrate this opportunity today. Thank you so very, very much.
Senator Lugar has agreed to answer a few questions. Before we start with the questions, I just want to say it was really a wonderful speech. There are at least two things that I'll remember very much about that speech. First, the call for the U.S. to continue to take leadership as a moral nation in the world. And second, the insiders excellently made points about the fact that diplomacy and development can complement each other, but do also need to be thought of separately. We will miss having you on Capitol Hill, but we're very excited to welcome you to the community of thinkers and doers. So, questions? Introduce yourself, please.
Rachel Oswald with Global Security Newsletter. Senator, could you share with us your, advice for the White House and as it deals with both the Senate and with Russia on arms control matters, whether that's securing a CTBT ratification or renewal of Nunn-Lugar? Any approaches you think they should take in both dealing with Russia and then Republicans in the Senate?
Okay, I leave it to the senator, but we do hope to keep as much focus as we can on development. This is another important issue for you, so.
Well, let me explain briefly. I went to Russia in August with the thought that the so-called umbrella agreement between Russia and the United States, which offers security for Americans who are working on arms control, or more literally destruction of the missiles, the warheads, and what have you in Russia, that this be expanded and enlarged. I found some who were in favor of that in the foreign ministry, many who were not in their defense ministry. Michael McFaul, our ambassador, accompanied me in all of these conversations, so there was continuity with the State Department, the Defense Department. Ash Carter in particular was following this, Kenny Myers and Ditra. That's a crucial point, and many stories have been written in the Russian press about the end of the non-Lugar program, along with the end of a lot of programs that are leaving Russia now because of an assertion of at least some new feeling of Vladimir Putin. I would just say that my guess is that we are probably going to have a continuation of some sort, and the negotiations still have some months to go. But leaving aside Russia, the problem clearly is that we have no negotiations presently with North Korea, for example. Not much going on, although there are stirrings with Iran. The problems of nuclear weapons in the hands of Turkey and Pakistan are huge. Here, the negotiations are rather silent, to say the least. Now, this is just one part of that problem. Another part that I've explored extensively with the Russians, but likewise in Asia, with the Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand, with personal visits, and with our Pacific Command, is the chemical and biological situations. And here, although Americans understand the dramatic effect, which is horrific, of nuclear weapons, small or large, the problems of plague and disease and other ways in which people can cause harm are evident. We face that problem right now with Syria, in a very embattled situation in which we do not know about the security of those chemical weapons. And if they're not secure, who is going to do something about that in the midst of conflicts of all sorts that are intersecting? So this is a longer answer than you may have wanted, but these are subjects in which I will continue to try to be engaged and helpful. Yes?
Kim?
Thank you, Senator. Kim Elliott here with the Center for Global Development, and I actually started in graduate school working on arms control issues, so I just want to congratulate you, join others for your work in that area. I think it's extremely important, but I will ask a question on development. And particularly, I liked your comments about the U.S. potentially being a leader, should be a leader on agricultural development. But another area where you have been a leader is in trying to reform the Farm Bill, and that makes it a little harder for the U.S. to be a leader in agricultural development in the rest of the world, but we continue to heavily subsidize our own farmers. So I just wonder if you have any advice going forward on how, at least at the margin, we might make a farm bill that's less taxing for us and also less costly for the rest of the world.
Well, in 36 years on the Agriculture Committee, I will say that I saw some progress, often glacial, but nevertheless. To put it very frankly, my dad was infuriated with Franklin Roosevelt because the farm policy then was to say he could only plant so many acres of corn and so many acres of soybeans on our farm. And the idea was that if you limited the supply, that the price would go up. Perverse as this may seem now, with an idea of trying to feed the world, at that point, the farm policy was one of trying to feed the farmers, at least to make the price go up a little bit. But in any event, the so-called Freedom to Farm bill that came along about 1996 finally gave me on my farm the option of producing as many acres of soybeans or corn or wheat or whatever I wanted to produce without stoppers. Now, I've often said the Agriculture Committee, and I hope this is not unkind, is made up frequently of a couple of farmers. Senator Grassley has been serving there for quite a while, and we claim to be farmers. And the rest looked to me like they might be lawyers for certain groups of farmers, cotton farmers or sugar farmers or so forth. And their role in that committee is not to take a look at the world, but it's to take a look at Mississippi or Louisiana or what have you. And I understand that. So we still have a farm bill that we passed in the Senate this past year. It will have to have new scrutiny again. But the idea was to move away from, as far as possible, from direct subsidies of specific crops to a farm insurance, a crop insurance idea. Now, this bill we passed only covers so much of the territory. A lot of people still really want the direct aid, so to speak. But it's a better idea. In other words, as opposed to my having certain target prices for my corn or beans or wheat, I can purchase crop insurance. And the federal government subsidizes the crop insurance thing to a considerable extent, but the subsidy comes really in terms of insurance, so that given climate change and wipeouts and so forth, people are not simply knocked out of business in a particular year, such as we had in Indiana, where my corn crop is back to the 40 bushels to the acre. And many point out that that's not going to be the last time this occurs. You can see weather maps given climate change, which parts of the country become warmer or cooler, and things are different, quite apart from around the world facing these problems. So I would say that at least the farm thing is becoming more sophisticated in the Senate bill. The House refused to pass any bill. So we're back at least not to the 30s, back to the 90s or thereabouts. I hope we'll make some improvements. But it's critical, as you point out, as I tried to make the point, as moral leaders in this situation. If we are hobbled by one subsidy after another, the sugar program being a prime example, in which I have constituents who produce candy. So they want the end of the sugar program. Well, if you are a sugar producer in Latin America, obviously you want the end of the sugar program. The only people wanting the sugar program are very few farmers who produce sugar and get a big subsidy for doing so. And that is not going to be morally defensible. And so development-wise, hopefully we'll make reforms in the Ag Committee.
Okay, we only have time for maybe one or two. How about, should we take two, and then you can choose?
Well, no,
All right. All right. I saw this one earlier, and there.
David Orden from IFPRI and Virginia Tech. We've interacted a number of times on farm policy, but I'm not going to follow up on that. I'd like to ask you about Pakistan, because for all of the negative news headlines, there's a lot going on the ground there under the Kerry Lugar bill. There's a civilian government that's almost served out its full 5 years, and cross your fingers and knock on wood, perhaps there'll be a civilian transition, first time in the history of the country this spring, where the current coalition or a different coalition comes in. If it's a civilian transition, it's quite a remarkable step in Pakistan's history. So I'd like to ask you about the future of Kerry Lugar, because already we're into like the third year of it and so on. I think it's a 5-year bill, and I'm curious about the prospects for U.S. civilian government strengthening, private sector strengthening, civilian sector strengthening in Pakistan in the context of our winding down in Afghanistan and the uncertainty of the end of the Kerry Lugar bill.
Because we did so much work on this at the center, I'm going to let you answer that question and then have one more, a short one.
Well, it is an important quest of the center, and as I've heard already from our chairman today, the thought is abounding that instead of a 5-year bill, we ought to be thinking in terms of a 10-year plan. The time factor being a critical issue. The reason when first Joe Biden and I brought this thing up before we could even pass the legislation, the Pakistanis liked it, was the 5 years aspect of it. The fact that we would not be leaving after 5 weeks or 5 months, the continuity. And that is still the critical element, I believe. So more power to the 10-year types who may be around here. But we're going to have to stay with plans in Pakistan, because you're right, the withdrawal from Afghanistan will occur at some stage. And the problems that I've already mentioned, ominous with the nuclear situation, in which we know something about it. We hope we know much more. But my goodness, what a Holocaust that could bring, but through accidents. the Mumbai incident being a case in point where people enraged wanted retaliation. They don't want to understand the elements of tribalism in Pakistan and what have you. On the good side, I was gifted to know a wonderful friend, Dr. Peter Armacost, who served for 10 years, the last 10 years, in Forman University in Lahore, Pakistan. This is a university in which Muslim and Christian students were studying together. It was enlarged by several times. Presbyterian Church in the United States and others really provided huge amounts of money. And Lahore is a dangerous place. My friend Pete Armacost for 10 years was right on the firing line with student groups and people coming and going through the whole process. But the fact is it worked. The number of graduates, the expertise coming from all of that situation, simply the goodwill that abounded in having an institution of that variety, very conspicuous in Lahore, was very important. And so this is the quest that we really have to continue on. Pakistan will continue to be a very important country, security-wise for us, but likewise in opportunities for the development of human beings.
Okay, thank you very much. We will try to harness your wisdom as we promote some of our recommendations, including the one you referred to. Yes.
Eric Boyle from ICF International. Senator Lugar, I was struck that during the introduction and during the discussion that a lot of the sponsors of a lot of the very important legislation that you were very successful in getting passed and implemented are no longer in the Senate. So I was curious if you could comment a little bit on who you see as the emerging leaders on the Hill on global development issues, and how can you and we keep them and working in your honor and your legacy moving forward on these important issues?
Well, I'm not going to target anybody. We'll not get into a long discussion today whether bipartisanship is dead or whether people listen to each other and so forth. This is going to be a considerable problem as at least the Foreign Relations Committee moves ahead. And I think the relationships there are still to be formed. I believe that Senator Menendez and Senator Corker, who probably will be the chairman and ranking members respectively, certainly respect each other. But to the extent to which there are ideas blossoming, potential for development of new legislation, not of cosmic significance, but just even of temporary value, that remains to be seen. The committee has found it very difficult to pass legislation during the past year. And there are no signs that may change given the membership or the changes in membership, as least I perceive it. So I'm not predicting gloom and doom, but I think this is going to have to be a building session of people finding relationships. Now, it could very well be, sometimes this happens in our world, that horrible crises occur. Hopefully they don't endanger American security, but nevertheless in which we're involved, and therefore somebody is going to rely upon the Foreign Relations Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, to do something about it, or at least to say something about it. Absent that, it would be sent all the way back up to the leadership of the Congress, the Speaker and the Majority Leader and so forth, trying to work things out at the summit. Now, that's never going to be very satisfactory in building grassroots support. And what we really need right now is much greater interest by members, all of them, in foreign policy at all. But for that matter, with our constituents who find this to be important, and therefore at least impress upon their members that they really want to hear more about it and they want solutions. Absent that, this is likely to be a White House executive forum in which most of the decisions get made at that point, sometimes over the protests of members of Congress who feel they were ignored, but the president with his responsibilities will say, well, somebody has to act, and I have just done so. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. We have closing remarks from Ed Scott, which is another honor for us.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you very much, Senator Lugar. It's truly is a reason to pause and reflect on the fact that this is the 10th time we've given this award out, and so it's a special occasion, and it's I think very fitting and very appropriate that we should give this award to someone as distinguished as Senator Lugar, who's done so much for the country in so many spheres of endeavor, not just in development, but in national security and other such issues. I'm hoping that as you transition into your new private role, that perhaps you'll even have more opportunities to bring your wisdom forward without thinking about what the implications are for your committee or your colleagues or anybody else, but just tell it like it is, because I think the American public needs and deserves to hear those views. So we look forward to it very much. I would be remiss if I didn't also just say how proud I am of what CGD does and what this award represents. For us, Nancy and I, we've been married for 12 years now, right? It's a long time, and we get along great. It's amazing. But I think it's because we both believe in the same thing, and that is that the U.S. and the world needs a place where people can give thoughtful and informed attention to the problems of the people in the world who are not as fortunate as we are, and who, by, as Bono used to say, by the accident of latitude and longitude, were born in a place where the bounty that we all enjoy in our society is not available to them. And I think that CGD has shown over the last 12 years that we could contribute that dialogue, whether it has to do with agricultural policy, debt relief, health policy, trade, or any of the other myriad of issues that are so important and which, if taken out of the realm of partisan bickering and if looked at in a thoughtful and constructive way, and particularly with an eye toward how can we change the situation, not just an academic appraisal of what the facts are and oh, isn't that terrible, but more what are those facts and what are we equipped to do about it, and what ought to happen tomorrow, the day after, and the day after in order to provide real solutions that can better people's lives. And I think we've done an awful lot in that realm, and there's a lot more to be done. And I think the staff and the management of CGD has really done a terrific job in furthering those objectives. So I thank you. I think I look forward to the next round of such inquiry. So I think that concludes our proceedings. Thank you again, Senator Lugar. We're all very proud of you. We're very happy you allowed us to give you this award. And if you need any help carrying it out, just let me know. I'm available. And you're all invited to attend the reception in the outer area here. Thank you very much.